Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am building something from Escape from Tarkov. Now, my younger brother is a Twitch/YouTube streamer. He plays tons of video games. Shout out Absurd and Aloof. And I've been watching him play this game for the past couple of days. Thought I would ask him what he suggested to build from the game, and he suggested this. And I thought, that's going to take more than a week. So I was looking at other ideas within the game, and this one particular mask stood out to me that I figured would be relatively simple to build and something that a beginner could kind of sink their teeth into if you wanted to dress up as something from the game. So I am going to walk you through from start to finish my template making process, so if you're new to this or new to the channel, you can kind of see how it goes, and it's not as hard as you think it is. So without further ado, today we are making a mask from the video game Escape from Tarkov. Let's get to building. To build most of my masks, this is the process that I use, the good old-fashioned tape and foil method. No fancy Pepakura files or 3D models, just an image or two from a Google search and a lot of guesswork. The premise for this method is fairly straightforward and simple. You just have to mash pieces of foil onto a dummy head and stop when you've reached the desired shape. I've been doing this for several years with hundreds of masks under my belt, so I make it look like it's pretty easy work, which with a bit of practice you can be pretty good at it pretty quick. At some point, you'll start to see the shape of what you are going for, and this is where you'll put one last layer of foil over the top of your build. Because this is a symmetrical mask, I'm only templating out one side. I go further than the area I need and start laying down a nice layer of duct tape over the single layer of foil. I try my best to limit the amount of wrinkles and overlapping of tape. This will be the surface that I draw my pattern onto to cut off the dummy, and I want it as smooth as I can get it. I usually hit it with a quick blowtorch to tighten up the tape around the surface of the sculpt. On the duct tape top layer, I start drawing out the shape of the mask, starting by hitting the edges that are raised or recessed. This will be where my seam lines are for the mask when I cut them off. Along with the cut lines, I give myself registration marks about every 1 or 2 inches to help me realign parts up later when I cut the pieces in foam and glue them together. I also go ahead and label the parts with names, generally calling them the parts of the face that the area sits on. To me, that makes the most sense. Then I take my hobby knife, cut it off of the mannequin, and make any additional cuts that I need to get the parts to lay flat on the table. These cuts are called darts and will allow for the flat material to round over when they're glued up. The more curves in an object, the more darts you'll need. For this build, I just needed one on the forehead area. I then transfer this flimsy pattern to poster board and add areas I think need angle cuts, sizes, and other marks to help people trying this pattern for themselves. You'll notice that my poster board cutout registration marks are now notches. These are made by a pattern notcher for my final version of the template, of what you can freely download down in the description below the video. You can also find hundreds of other free patterns on my website that is also linked down below. I traced my cutout pattern onto some 6mm foam. Now you don't have to use 1, 2, 3 blocks, but they sure do come in handy when you're trying to hold a pattern down and trace it with a Sharpie or a pencil. Also, all the parts in this build have an L written on them. This means that it's the left side of the mask. To get the right side, simply flip the pattern to the back side and trace it again to get the mirrored right portion. You should have a total of 9 pieces when you trace everything out. My patterns typically have some colored edges where there are parts that need angle cuts. There are several blue lines on this one that mean you need to cut the edge at a 45-degree angle cut inward from the line. I have one green line that'll eventually get added to the eyepiece, and that dotted line will get cleaned up on the final pattern. I'm still figuring out things over the course of this build, so you may see parts of the pattern change, and you kind of benefit from not repeating my mistakes by me fixing it for the final version. For 45-degree angle cuts, just tilt your blade and lock your wrist as you pull through the foam. You can also buy tools that set the blade at an angle for you to drag across the surface, or just sand the angle into the foam with a rotary tool if you mess up the tilt. You can practice cuts on scrap foam or cardboard to help you get the hang of cutting angles into your material. Assembly isn't too difficult on this one at all, with there only being 9 pieces to the entire mask. I hit the edges with contact cement, let the glue set up for a few minutes until it's no longer wet to the touch, and then tack the pieces together. When you start pushing parts together, you try to keep the outside surface as flush as possible with each other, and trust the registration marks as you go. It may take a little pushing or pulling of the foam to get the marks to line up. Usually you get resistance where curves or sharp angles are. As far as what type of glue to use, it's really up to you. You could use super glue or hot glue if you wanted to, but I particularly like the results I get from Barge contact cement. They're not a sponsor, they're a little more expensive than other contact cements, but I usually get good adhesion with a single layer, and it has that flexibility that foam needs. I like to put one side of the mask together at a time and then join them down the center at the end. This allows me to not rush the glue up and mess up alignment or have the glue sit for too long and have to add extra coats. Once the halves are smushed together, I shape the brow overlay and glue it over the eyes. I think this mask could make for a great base for some other masks. I believe in TARKOV is actually based off of the Army of Two Rio's mask from another video game. To me, it also looks like several other superhero and villain masks, so you could definitely do a little bit of tweaking and adding to this template to make it something completely different, which I probably will do in the near future. After I sand over the seams of my mask, I want to make some better transitions from the brow piece, as well as go over some of those seams where I may have some gaps. I'm using some gap filler by Prop Monkey Studios, not a sponsor either, to kind of help fill up those areas. You could use clay foam or all-purpose flexible caulking to do a similar job. I like the gap filler because it sands a little better than those other products, and in a couple of hours, depending on how thick you lay it down, you can continue working. I smush it into the seam lines and smooth it over by dipping my finger in water and running it across the surface. The mask in TARKOV has a bunch of very deep scratches and gouges on the left side of the mask, so I put a cutting wheel on my rotary tool and very carefully add the battle damage. I know it looks like I'm being fast and loose, but my video clips are usually sped up 2 to 5 times faster than I'm actually going. I do this so you're not watching a 2-hour long video. Some may appreciate that, but the majority of people do not, as the attention span is maybe 2 or 3 minutes into a video. Anytime you put that cutting wheel on your rotary tool, please be super cautious. Wear eye protection with respirator. I've had one of those explode on me before, and had I not been wearing eye protection, I would have lost one. The wheel shard stuck in my safety shield less than half an inch from my eyeball, and those things will go through skin like crazy. I've got a lot of scars on my hands from cutting wheels. 2 coats of Plasti Dip. I dry brush on some acrylic, going from a black surface to an off-white. Eventually I switch over to a sponge and dab on some brown and black as I make this mask look extremely battle-worn. You could also work the opposite direction and start with a white surface followed up with washes of watered down black and brown acrylic. If you mess up, just paint over it. My paint jobs are usually a pushing and pulling off of paint until I'm satisfied with the dinginess of the piece as it relates to the reference images. I tend to gravitate towards heavily battle damaged, rusted, and dirty props because I love the layering of textures and colors. They look a lot more lived in and realistic when you add that grime to them. You might notice I also added some fake buckles on the edges. I included them in the template, but for some reason didn't record myself gluing them on. For my lenses, I'm going to use some acrylic sheets that have a dot matrix painted on one side. I bought a bunch of these on Amazon that have lights with them, and this mask didn't have a need for light, so I just cut them off when I rounded over the edges of the acrylic. I hot glue these on the inside of the holes in the mask. Don't use super glue with acrylic sheets. It fogs up the lenses and kind of adds this haze that makes it impossible to see through. And don't sleep on hot temp glue guns. Some of the worst prop making injuries I have had have occurred from that liquid hot napalm Satan's butthole stuff dripping on my bare skin and giving me like blisters inside of blisters inside of blisters. So definitely pay attention to the drip. The last step in this build is adding strapping so that we can wear the mask. I'm using 1-inch elastic banding for that I get from the hobby store in the sewing section. To guesstimate the length that you'll need for your mask, hold your mask on your face. Wherever the edges of the mask sit just above your ears, make note of it. Then stretch the elastic around the back of your head slightly past that point and cut off a piece. I then sandwich that elastic between the mask and a thin piece of 2mm foam to help secure it in place. The top is cut similar but looped around the first piece and glued to itself so that it freely slides back and forth. I hope you enjoyed this build and give it a go yourself. If you do, please tag me on socials. I would love to see this pattern get some good use. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, not too bad. I definitely think it's something that a beginner could do, and kind of putting that sealant stuff over the seams hides it even more. You could be more precise and put the cuts more strategically to not have to do it as much, but it definitely makes the mask a lot cleaner. Maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to pull something from a video game, bring it into the real world, and yeah, just make a cool, creepy mask. Yeah. Maybe you'll get some...
Yay!
And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them, much props. If you like watching video game playing and you want somebody super smart to tell you how to do stuff, go watch my brother. See you next week. Peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and you'd like to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.